So welcome to part number 2 of presenting modal view controllers and popovers. I think probably a lot of people were most interested in the popovers part of this video lecture, and we will get there this time. This is the first app that we're doing in managing multiple view controllers. So the first time we've had 2 different view controllers instead of just a single view controller. And we're kind of starting it off very simple. So the very simple way is these 2 options for presenting our first second view controller. So where we left off last time is we had added the modal view controller to the iPhone. So if you click on this, it will pop up the modal view controller. But we left you intentionally, just for fun, with a cliffhanger that the done button didn't work yet. So let's go implement that first. It's going to be really easy. So if you were to go into the help area and look up UI view controller, find the area for presenting modal views, there's a function called dismiss modal view controller. And so this is obviously the one that we're going to use to do the dismissal. One thing that's interesting about dismiss modal view controller is, conceptually speaking, it would probably make sense to have the parent object who put up the modal view be the one to take it down. And that kind of works conceptually. However, if you call it on the modal view itself, it does work. And that's actually what we're going to do because it's easier. We will show you how you would have the parent call it, but that would involve delegation. And I don't want to get to that this time, so we will get there. But for this example, we're just going to have the child dismiss themselves. So if we come into the child, which in this case is the info view, where it says to do, dismiss this modal view controller, I'm going to comment that out, and I'm going to go ahead and do it. So self, I'm going to also be able to do it. Dismiss modal view controller animated, yes. So I'm actually dismissing myself, which will work just fine. So let's go ahead and run this. And one thing that's kind of neat about this is the way it dismisses, it knows how it got put up. So if I put it up this way and I hit done, you can see it dismisses it right back down. If you use one of these others to put it up, so let's say I did partial curl, so if I hit this button, it'll do a partial curl up, and then when I say done, it'll do the reverse animation. It even does the horizontal flip well, which is nice. So if you hit it, you can see how this side kind of flipped over to here, and then if you hit done, it kind of flips itself back. And you might not think that's a big deal, but it's very jarring if it doesn't do that, because you like to look at the sheet of paper a certain way. So you can leave whichever animation you find the most exciting. Feel free to use whichever ones you like. I'm sure eventually people will start to like the simpler animations. So people will probably end up liking cross dissolve looks okay, but probably the best one is just the default cover vertical. It's not very flashy, but I think it looks pretty good. There's a reason they made it the default, right? Cool. So view controller number 1, view controller number 2, number 1, number 2, number 1. All right. Next thing we want to do is we want to be able to handle rotations. Right now you can see that the iPhone has the defaults, so it does not support rotations at all. Whereas the iPad will have the iPad's defaults, and the iPad's default is that it will support rotations. So you can see that the iPad goes ahead and rotates. Remember, we set those struts, so that's why the buttons stay in the correct relative places. So let's go through and set some of these things. First, let's change the iPhone. So the iPhone has a should auto-rotate to interface orientation. It's commented out. The reason Apple does this is they know that a lot of people will want to override this method. So they put a placeholder in here for you, commented out. The commented out version also shows you what it does by default. And what it does by default is it says, should I auto-rotate? And this says, only auto-rotate if it's to orientation portrait. So what we want to do is we want to support every orientation except for portrait upside down. They say on the iPhone that you usually shouldn't support that one. So we're going to say return yes for everything except for portrait upside down. And now if I change this, oops, I meant to run it on the iPhone. Now it should start to rotate when we rotate. Oh, I meant to say I'm holding down Command and hitting either left arrow or right arrow. That's what I'm doing. So if I hold down Command, I hit left arrow. Here you can see now it's going to rotate. So it'll rotate if I go landscape left, so you can see the home button. Sometimes forget, yeah, the home button is on the right because the left side of the screen is on the bottom. If I do landscape right, it rotates there as well. But if I do portrait upside down, it doesn't rotate to that one. So it just stays in whatever it was in last. But then once I hit one of the other three, rotations occur. Cool. So it's rotating. One little gotcha is if I hit the info button, now if I rotate, something weird happens. This view controller does not support rotations. So just for giggles, we're gonna go ahead and change this, and we're gonna make it to where it does support rotations. I'm not gonna worry about the details, but we're gonna say that yeah, we would like for it to support rotations, depending on which platform it's on. So if I hit done, you can see it kind of does some funky things here in the simulator of it just kind of manually changes it. So we're going to set each one appropriate. So the iPhone one was easy, as long as it's not portrait upside down. The iPad one was even easier, just support everything. Yes, just return yes. For the UI view interface, what we're going to do is we're going to override it should auto rotate to interface orientation. And we're going to do something that Apple doesn't recommend, but it just ends up being useful. And we're going to encode determine if we are running on iPad. For some reason they say not to do this, but I really don't see any problems with it. And so what we're going to do, there's a couple ways you can determine if you're running on an iPad. So we're going to do an if statement, and if we're running on an iPad, then we're going to say yes, rotate in every direction. And if we're not on an iPad, we're going to say return if it's not portrait upside down. So you can see that this view is going to be consistent with with the parent view. The way you can determine if you're on an iPad or not, there's a couple ways you can do it. The one that's recommended is user interface idiom. So user interface idiom is a macro, and user interface idiom also has types. I believe it's iPad. I can never remember if it's a capital I or not. Now this is where notes are handy. Pad. Oh, that left off the I. Oh, and I've got the macro way wrong. User interface idiom is apparently all uppercase. You can see I try not to use it much. So this isn't anything. So this is what I meant to do. I should have known by the color. And this one I also got wrong. It's user interface idiom iPad. Just to make sure I didn't mess it up, I'm going to copy paste it from the slides because I know the slides worked. Alright, I had it right. Cool, so let's go ahead and see if this magic little thing says, am I on the iPad or not? Or am I on an iPad-like thing? The nice thing about this is if Apple releases something that works like the iPad, then user interface idiom should pick it up. So now if I run it on an iPhone, if I rotate, I didn't set the struts yet, so who knows what it's going to do, but it will actually do the rotates. It didn't do terrible. I lost my button, but you can see that the toolbar by default has its rotate right. These three and the button all maintain their distance to the upper left. So if you wanted to make some quick changes, you know, you could say button, maintain your distance to the bottom. So if I say 3, just maintain your distance relative to the bottom. These two, maintain their distance to the upper left. Maybe this one you want to maintain to the upper right. Or actually, it might be better if they just all were floating in the middle. And then this one, this is just going to look bad no matter what. I'm going to say float in the middle. It's going to overlap with my button. You could move this around to your heart's content. If you wanted to make it even better, the better way to do it, yeah, that worked out even worse. The better way to do it would be to include it in your will rotate to interface orientation and manually move them around to adjust them. Sometimes the struts are good enough, and sometimes you can get the behavior that you want out of them, but sometimes they're really not good enough, and there's really nothing you can do about it. Cool. So that's good enough for now. I'll tell you what, just because it's bugging me, I'm just going to move this up here. Not the best solution I've ever come up with in my whole life. Alright, I made it worse, not better. But I'm going to quit tinkering with it because it just doesn't matter. Alright, I think it's probably worse. But we see that it's going to do the right thing depending on the device it's on. So yeah, maybe a little UI work needed. I did better in this sample than I did here. So the next thing we want to start doing is we want to start presenting this thing modally on the iPad. So on the iPad, you can see when we press the info button, it calls super, and super makes the info view for us. So it's done step 1, put it on the heap, and then step 2 is presenting it in some fashion. So for step 1, we're going to present modally. So you can present things modally on the iPad. So it looks just like it did before. Present modal view controller. We're going to present the info view animated, yes. And I've already imported its header file, so that's good. Just like before, we can set the modal transition style. And then now this one, we also care about that other property we saw, which was presentation style. I was just going to find it here. So presentation style is how much space it takes up on the screen. And the presentation style, oops, I did not click on the presentation style. Let's try to actually click on it this time, Dave. Presentation style has a couple different options as well. Its options were full screen. You can probably guess what that one does. Page sheet, form sheet, or current context. And then just like before, we've got the same presentation options. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste them out from here. And so you can pick the combination that you really like. Let's say I wanted to do a flip horizontal, and let's just go through and use some of these. Form sheet, I think, is the one that's the most useful, so I'll start with it. So if I go and run this thing on the iPad, and I click the info button, you can see it presents this form sheet. My choices with my UI were terrible because it looks horrible, but I'm not going to fix it because it's not important. So you can see that presentation style determines how big it is, and then the animation determines how it shows up. And there's some really neat combinations that you can get for free. Page sheet is kind of neat in landscape, but I don't really like it in portrait. In landscape, what it looks like is it takes over like everything except for the sides. That was kind of cool. Horizontal flip kind of came in. That looks pretty neat. But then portrait mode, I don't really like it as well because it takes over the whole darn screen, and that's just too big in my opinion. I don't like anything on the iPad that takes over the whole darn screen. It's just too jarring. That one I kind of like. I'm going to put it back to form sheet. And of course you can try anything you want. I wonder what partial curl would look like. I guess it'll just kind of sit there partially curled. Ooh, it did not like partial curled. It crashed. I've never seen it crash. Yeah, don't use partial curl for this one. I'm gonna put it back to flip and form sheet, and I'm gonna put it back to those just before I comment it out for good. So presenting it modally is one thing we could do, but it's not what we're going to do in this example. So now that you've made it, you see how it works. Log it in your memory. It is a useful skill to have. It is not what we're going to do this time. What we're going to do is we're going to present a UI Popover controller. Yay, we finally got to Popover controllers. I know some people were waiting the whole stinging videos for this. A popover, what it is of course a physical thing on the screen that you can see, but what's inside of here is actually a view controller object, and then that view controller has a view, but it's not just a view, right? It's actually a view controller, and I think that's why they chose to put the word controller in it, because it really is a controller for a view controller is really what it is, and it also has a physical component. It's always presented on top of another view, so you always say what view it's going to be presented in. And to dismiss a popover, they recommend you don't have a done button. You just make it to where you click outside of it, and that'll make the popover go away. So let's see about making a popover. So the first time we've used popovers, so let's go ahead and start off with looking up help. So start typing in UI Popover Controller. They're really not that complicated. Like, you know how in UI View you scroll through the task for friggin' ever? This is it for popovers. I mean, you could read the whole thing. So when you initialize one, you should always have its content view controller. So when you initialize it, you should always use this one. You shouldn't ever use it. Always use this one. There's things that you can set about it. If you did use a init, you could set it later, or you could read it. And you know, this is setting the view controller. Things that are important is being able to set the size. This can be something that's important. There's an advanced thing called a pass-through views, where if you click somewhere off the screen, you might not want that thing to make the popover disappear. We're not going to deal with that today, but it's something you can do. There is a delegate method for it, and the delegate method can call you about when it's about to be dismissed. We're not going to choose to use the delegate either, but it's a pretty simple delegate. Whether it's visible or not, we actually are going to use that. Which direction the arrow is pointing, and those are all well and good, but these are the important ones. Presenting it. You can present it from a random rectangle. You can present it from a bar button item, and this is necessary because a bar button item doesn't have a frame, so they kind of had to make this one special because popovers are used with bar button items all the time. And then you can dismiss it from code. You'll rarely use this one, dismissing it from code. I say that, and we're going to use it today. Usually it's just they click outside of it and it goes away. So initializing it, presenting it, very important. Let's do this. So instead of what we did before, we're going to alloc a popover, and then we're going to present the popover. So to alloc the popover, we're going to use the same style we used before. We're going to lazy load it. The easiest way to do a lazy load is to create an iVar. So we're going to create a UI Popover Controller iVar. I'll just call it Popover. I'll call it Info Popover. I think that's what I called it in the notes. To make the memory management easier, I'm going to create a property. Anytime I create a property, I'm going to have to create the synthesize. And then anytime I have a retain property, I'm going to have to dealloc it, or sorry, release it within dealloc. And if the view gets unloaded, it is just fine to throw it away in that situation as well. So inside here, and I did that fast because again we've done it many times. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if it's nil, then we're going to make it. King's is barking again. So to make this, we'll use the same style we've done before, UI Popover Controller. Code completion doesn't like me. New Popover. Maybe I'll save and it'll fix me up. UI Popover Controller, there we go. Alec. Never seen an uppercase. Alright, so Alec. Init. And the one we want is we want init with, man, my code completion is struggling. I'll just copy paste it from here. Init with content view controller. And the content view controller is the thing that's going to go inside of it. So the content view controller in this case is self.info info view controller. I rely on code completion. So that's what's going to go into the popover. To do my clean memory management, I'm going to say info popover, you are this new popover, you can release it. I do this to be like the book, but really you could, there's a lot of different things. You could just auto-release it and do it in one line, but it's kind of nice to not use the auto-release pool when you can avoid it. Here it wouldn't matter. So there we lazy loaded it. We took care of the memory management with ivars. You find ivars are the easiest way to do memory management. And then we need to present this thing. So with modal views, we said like self. So this view controller presented that one. With this approach, you actually say info popover present. Dang, it didn't want to code complete for me again. How can I function? Copy paste from the help. So we're going to use present from rect. So we're going to present it from a rectangle using a certain view with certain arrow directions, and we're going to choose whether it's animated or not. So the rect that we wanted to point at, whatever you clicked on to cause it, is pretty much what you always want to do. And we've already got a pointer to the thing that we clicked on, and that was the sender. And what we want from the sender is we want his frame. So we talked about center, bounds, the CG affine transform, and then frame is the one that we want here. It's a CG rect that takes care of the center and the bounds. The view that we're going to put it in is we're going to put it into self.view, so it goes right in here. And then for the UI arrow direction, to start off with, there are a couple different arrow directions. We're going to say any. And I know things like this because I've read the help, right? So UI popover arrow direction, what are my options? My options are up, down, left, right, any, and it's kind of the combination of all of these. And then there's unknown, which I haven't ever needed. I'm going to start with any. Do I want this to animate? Yes, sure I want to animate. You animate most things that the user did, right? The only time you don't animate is if you're doing special things in code, which we will do. Let's run it, and let's see what we've got. If you click on the info, presto, you have your first ever Popover controller. And don't worry, it has plenty of little bugs. Let's look at these little bugs. These little bugs are as follows. The first little bug you see is you can see that it used a popover on the right hand side, whereas it actually would look much better if it did the top. So that's something we're going to fix. Another thing that you may notice is that it might point to that bigger button. That's no good. We want the user to think that it's only this thing here, right? So we don't want it to ever show up way out here. We only want it to show up, right on this. So this looks a little better. It popped up on the info button. It's a little off here. I'm not sure why. So we want to fix where it starts. Another thing that's kind of wacky is if you rotate. So if you rotate from landscape to portrait, it's not too bad. Because landscape would have put it off the screen, but at least kept it on the screen. You'll notice that it is shorter. And you can see that once it's already been made once, it kind of keeps some of those features. But this is kind of interesting. If you start in portrait and then you go to landscape, it goes pretty wacky. It does not handle rotations very well at all. It does not point the right direction, it does not point to the right thing, and it is not the right size at all. So there's plenty that we are going to fix with this thing. So glad we got your first ever popover up. That's great. But now that there are a lot of problems that we're gonna start fixing. The first couple are fairly easy, and that is the first one is the arrow direction. That one's really easy. Instead of saying any, just say up, and that'll guarantee that it'll always use an up arrow, which is what I think looks best here. Next, I don't like that it might point at that background button. I want it to always point at this button. There are a couple ways that you could do this, but somehow you have to get access to that button. What I think is easiest is just to make an iVar. You could put a tag on it. That works totally fine. I use tags a lot. You could actually search through all of the buttons and find one that's of that special type. That also works fine. I do that all the time too. But if we're just trying to focus on other things, everybody knows how to make iVars. They're easy. Really no harm in it either, other than, carpal tunnel. Once we make this iVar, you can see that I made a property on it with an IB outlet. So that means that I'm going to be able to connect it. So if I drag from Files Owner to just the little button, and I say you are my info button, now I've got access to it in code, and now I can make sure that instead of using whichever frame it sees, I want to make sure it uses the self.info buttons frame. Since I didn't need to typecast it, I could just use the dot syntax. And now you can see that even if I click on like the very bottom, it still points to the info button. It does not handle rotations very well yet. I'm not sure why it's a little off. I wonder if my info button is a sub-view of that other button. I don't know why it's a little off, to be honest. I'm not worried about it, but I'm surprised that it missed it all. Usually it's just right on. I'll tell you what, I don't know why it missed. I'll put it in the upper corner to make sure it hits. Cool. So let's start fixing some more things. So those two were easy. The next thing we're going to fix is the size. There are a lot of ways to fix the size, which is kind of confusing a little bit. The two approaches you can take are this. You can change it on the popover. So you can say popover content size equals something. So you can change it on the popover side. You can also change it on the content size for the view that's in the popover. These are a little different in that this one you have to change before you init the popover. So like if you init it with a view controller, it looks at that instant, and what it really does is it sets this property. So at the instant you create it, it looks for the content size for the view that's in the popover, and it sets it at that view. So there are two good ways we could do this. So we could say self.info view controller, because that's what's going to be on there. Set the property content size for popover. And let's say we wanted to make it 320 by 460. You know, you can pick whatever you want. That's one option. You see that this one I did before the init with view controller. Or I could set it on the popover. Now this one I have to set after after I've made it, right? Because if I set it before, then I'm only setting stuff on nil, which doesn't do anybody any good. Those both work. We're going to do something different. The thing that we're going to do is we're setting a property, right? The reason that we're setting a property is because somewhere behind the scenes, somebody's going to call this property. And what we're going to do, which is even better, is properties, you know, you can synthesize them, that's one way to do it, but you can also write your own getters and setters, and that's what we're going to do. So there's a property called content size for view and popover, and somewhere in the superclass that has been synthesized. What we're going to choose to do is we're going to manually override it. So we're going to say cg size, content size for view in popover. So by manually overriding the getter, if they try to get that property, this function is going to override the synthesize, and we're just going to manually type in what we want to return. So cg size make, let's say we wanted it 320 by, I said 460 in the slides, but I really don't even need 460. Let's say 300. That might look good for mine. Size yours for how big you want it. So this approach seems kind of hard-code-ish, but I really don't mind it in this case, because who knows the size of this thing better than, you know, itself, right? So it decides how big it is. So if it decides how big it is, let's run it and let's see if this actually did anything useful, and see if my guess of 300 was a good guess or not. 300 was great. So now you can see that it picks this appropriate size, which is pretty awesome. We've still got this problem of rotations, and it's still slightly missing, but I'm not worried about it. Oh, maybe it was too far over. It just can't shoot that far over. So we've got a problem with rotations that happens whenever you start in portrait and then you go to landscape. That's the only place you see it here, but it's a problem you always have to worry about. And then we also have the problem of the done button doesn't do anything. Really the problem is not that the done button doesn't do anything. The problem is that the done button is there. We don't need done buttons. So we're going to fix those too, so we still got a couple things to fix. Let's go ahead and fix the rotations one first. The solution to the rotation problem, there's a bunch of ways you could do it, but the way that's recommended is that when you rotate, there's a method called will rotate to user interface orientation, and then there's also one that's called did rotate. And the recommended solution is actually just in will rotate, make it disappear, and then in did rotate, put it back up. So it's kind of a lame solution, but it's what's recommended and it works very well, right? So there's two functions we've got to override. One is called will rotate to user interface orientation, and then the other one is called did rotate from user interface orientation. I really can't function without code completion, because I only remember like the first like 6 words of everything. So in will rotate, probably I should call my super, right? Because you never know, maybe the super wants to do something. And I'm just going to pass along whatever got passed to me. So I'm going to pass along the to interface orientation, and then I'm also going to pass along the duration. So be a good little object-oriented programmer and call your super. Great. And then what I want to do in here is I want to dismiss the popover if visible, and store if you dismissed it. So if we're going to store if we dismissed it or not, a handy place to make an IVAR. So we're going to say restore popover. No real reason to make a property. The properties give you the advantage of it's publicly available, it takes care of memory management, and it'll let you use the dot syntax. I don't care about any of those, so I'm not going to bother with the property. So if it's visible, so we can ask if it's visible by saying self.info popover, and then I believe it's called popover visible, question mark. And if it was visible, all right, I better go look and help. It is called Popover Visible. I nailed it. And the getter is Popover Visible. So doing this works just fine. I could have also said, you know, if I'd wanted to be more Objective-C-ish, I could say is Popover Visible. Code completion doesn't like me again. If it was visible, then the restore popover needs to be yes. It needs to get restored. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it down temporarily, dismiss, oh man, code completion with popovers, you're killing me. So dismiss popover animated. And this is a great time where we don't want to animate. So I don't really want to animate it going away because I don't want them to even know that it went away. So just dismiss it silently. And then if it needs to be restored, first make sure you turn it off so it doesn't keep happening to you. And then what we want to do to put it back up is just what we did before. I'm just going to copy paste it. Obviously, if it was more complex, you'd make a function, but this is simple enough that I'm just going to copy paste it. And you can see it's also nice that we had access to the info button because we could just use it here. So let's see if we've just done anything useful or not. So the real problem was when it was in portrait, and then we went to landscape, it was showing up over in the middle of the screen. You can see that this fixed it. So if you watch real close, you can see it goes away, and then it comes back, goes away, comes back, goes away, comes back. And this is the recommended way to handle rotations with popovers. To take them down, put them back up. Works just fine. So we're getting there. We fixed most of our problems. The only thing we got to fix is this done button. Doesn't need to be here. So let's make the done button, instead of making it do something, let's just make it not be there. If we want to make it not be there, we've got to have a way to access it. So inside my info view controller, I'm going to just have a way to access the toolbar. Not being very creative today, I'll just call it the toolbar. So at property, non-atomic, retain IB outlet of the toolbar. And then, of course, I need to synthesize it. And then I need to release it. And since this is a view controller, if the view gets thrown in the trash, feel free to trash my toolbar as well. And then I've got to go connect it in the zip file. I like to use this tone of voice sometimes. All right, so now we've got a reference to the toolbar, just a lot of boilerplate code. And what we want to do is we want to, in the iPad, take it down. This is kind of sneaky. So the thing that's kind of sneaky about it is that the view controller doesn't create the view until it's about to be shown. So what that means is if I were to hide it, so let's say I was to hide it up here, the toolbar hidden equals yes, this won't do anything because it will set a property on an object that doesn't exist. So you're actually just setting something on nil here. We can prove it by running it. What? The toolbar? Didn't like the toolbar? Why didn't I like the toolbar? Let's go see if I typoed somewhere. The toolbar? The toolbar? Oh, I was setting it on Popover. I mean to say info, what's it called? Info view controller. Yeah. So, all right, there we go. And so this is not going to work, is the expectation. So I click it. And the reason it didn't work, this is important, is there's a view controller, and then the view controller has an ivar pointing to the view, and the view does not get made until it is needed. So if I set it up here, the view has not been made yet, so this has not been made yet. So really this is just nil. And if you set something on nil, it doesn't do anything at all. You just set something on nil. So it's important to disassociate pointers from the objects they point to. So we won't even have this view until it is presented. So I'm going to go ahead and set this at the very bottom. So by now I know that the view will be made, which means the toolbar will be made, which means I can set its hidden property. So now it should be able to look all right. So now if I click it, you can see that there's no toolbar. And if you wanted to, you can even tighten it up a little more if you were so inclined. So instead of 300, it would probably look good at 240. Is that too much? The toolbar I think was 44. Oh, that was a little too tight. So you can see that 10 more at the bottom. I don't want to be a HIG violation on my button. So you can see that at this point we've got a properly sized popover. It didn't stretch to the bottom. There is no done button because popovers don't need them. On rotates, it will stay rotated to the correct spots. The pointer will always be up, and it will always be pointing at the little info button. So details, 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 they're what help make your app look great. If you did even one of these wrong, every user would be like, what'd you do this? What'd you do this? What'd you do this? And we can see that this looks really sharp in the iPad. It actually looks a lot better than it did in the iPhone. Probably if I had it to do again on the iPhone, I would probably have made some changes, but it looks good enough. Cool. So that is a major part of the app. I could go ahead and stop here, but the rest of it's going to go fairly quickly. So let's just go ahead and plow through and let's make it happen. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an action sheet on the iPhone. And then we're also going to create an action sheet for the iPad. And really it's the iPad that has motivated this, just because I think action sheets on the iPad look so sharp. I really think they look professional. And they're easy. So let's go ahead and get the slides caught up. So restoring the popover, we did that. We removed the done button. We saw how you hit it. Well, it actually did work if we put it before it was presented. So I guess it makes the view when you put it in the popover. So it actually had made it a little earlier than what I thought. Action sheets. So you saw action sheets back in the book in like chapter 3. It's not a hard concept. They've been around for a while. We're going to use a lot of the same concepts with action sheets. We're going to lazy load it in the super class. So lazy load action sheet in the super, which is here. Like I say, the easiest way to lazy load something is to make an IVAR for it. So we're going to say UI action sheet. What did I call it in the slides? I want to use the same name. I called it color action sheet. Color action sheet. It does not need an IB outlet, but it does need a property because the properties are going to make memory management easier on us. And so I'm going to choose to synthesize my property, release my property, and since this is a view controller, if the view goes away, feel free to throw away my action sheet. I don't really need it. If the view goes away, I can get it back. Great. And then now to lazy load it, we're going to say if self dot action sheet is equal to nil. So if it does not exist, let's make a new one. So a new action sheet is a UI action sheet alloc. That part is obvious. And then how do we want to complete a knit? You can see that there are some simple methods, but then the one that you'll pretty much want to use for action sheets is this very robust one. And this has a bunch of different things in it. And you saw this in chapter 3. It's got, I'm going to finish it up here, the title. So what would you like the title to be? There's a lot of things that you can do for the title. To be honest, there are times where you don't really want a title. To be honest, I don't think titles look that great, so don't be surprised at all if you just make the title nil. Next thing up is the delegate. Who do you want the delegate for this to be? Just because I'm setting up for next time, you can see that the delegate, it says it has to implement, whoever the delegate is, it has to implement UI action sheet delegate. So I'm going to say self. We just want the superclass to be the delegate. But that means I've got to go implement this protocol if I want to be the delegate. For the cancel button, it's got a cancel button, a destructive button, that one shows up in red, and then other buttons. What we're going to do is for the cancel button, we're just going to say no change. For the destructive button, we don't really need one. And then for the colors, pick whatever colors you like. I'm going to use red, yellow, and cyan. It is nice to pick ones that are built into the system. What I mean by that is if you go look up the UI color class, it does make your life a little easier if you pick one of the ones that is kind of pre-made. So I selected red, yellow, and cyan. Feel free to use whatever you want, but if you use it from this list, it will make your life a little easier. And the order does matter. So red, yellow, cyan. That's how my order goes. So here I've made my action sheet. Next thing I need to do is I need to actually set it to the property. And then release it to be a good memory management. Great, and so that's where I make it. So I should be all set there. And then any other action is going to happen in the subclasses. The subclasses will take care of presenting it, but the delegate we could actually just go ahead and take care of in the super. So let's do that. So we've already added the IVAR. The next thing we need to do is we need to implement that delegate. So let's go over to the .h file. This is the super for the Modal Pop View Controller. And we say we shall implement the UI action sheet delegates. What I like to do is I like to just make myself a little pound pragma area. And then what I like to do is I like to hold down Command and just double click on the word, and then that takes me into the protocol. And then I just copy all of them and I decide who I want to implement. You can see that they were all optional, so anything that I don't want to implement I can just delete. And I actually don't want to implement a lot of them. This is if it gets canceled, do something specific. Will present, did present, I don't care. Will dismiss, did dismiss, I don't care. The only one I actually care about is clicked a button. So if they clicked a button, I want to know about it. And so depending on what they clicked, I'm going to take a different action. So if, for example, they picked the cancel button, there are some really convenient things in a UI action sheet. It actually keeps track of what is the button index for cancel, what is the button index for the destructive, what is the button index for the first of the other buttons. So you should always use these, right? So if button index is equal to action sheet dot cancel button, feel free to use action sheet or self.color action sheet. They are actually one and the same here. I only really made this color action sheet just to help me with the lazy loading, just so I'd load it exactly once and not until it was needed. So if it's the cancel button, what I really want to do is I just want to do nothing. That one was easy to write. If the button is something different, so let's say we don't have a destructive button, but we do have the first of the other buttons. I'm going to go ahead and do some copy. Let's go ahead and, so the first of the other buttons was red. So if it's red, then I want to say self.view background color. Set it to the UI color red color. And then let's go ahead and stick on some of the others. So if it's the first button index plus 1, or the first button index plus 2, so here I want to say yellow color or cyan color. So these are going to change the background color when our action sheet gets called. So we implement the protocol. That's an important step. We're set up as the delegate. That's an important step. The only thing we're missing is we need to actually present this action sheet. So we've made the object. It exists on the heap. It's got the delegate set up, but it's never going to be shown with the way we currently have it set up. So let's go ahead and show this thing. So to show an action sheet, there are a couple things that you need to know about. You can show it from a tab bar. You can show it from Toolbar. You can show it in a view. So this will just take over the whole view. This is the one you want for iPhone, iPad, iPod Touch. Or you can show it from a bar button item, or you can show it from a rect. So show in view is what we're going to use for the iPhone. Show from rect is what we're going to use on the iPad. Let's do the iPhone first. So let's look at the iPhone's pressed color change button. What we want to do here is we want to say self. We want to say self dot color action sheet. The iVar also made it easier to communicate between the super and the subclass. Show in view self dot view. So very easy to go ahead and display in the iPhone, or sorry, in the iPhone or iPod Touch. It's getting too late for me. So it looks like it was expecting a semicolon somewhere. Whew, must be past my bedtime. Else if. Forgot the word if. Else if. Else if. Hopefully when you saw me type that you cringed. And you're like, man, he forgot his if. If I hit the color button, you can see it pops up from the bottom. If I hit red, it takes its action. Yellow, it takes its action. Cyan takes its action. No change is no change. And so we've got this, this magical little background action sheet. Action sheets are very easy. They are, doing a modal presentation that's only taken over half the screen, which is pretty slick. Let's go ahead and do it for the iPad. So the only thing we did in the subclass is we just said show in view. So we're going to do a very similar thing in the iPad. So we're just going to say self.color action sheet, but instead of show in view, we're going to use show from rect. So we're going to say show from rect. And I'll go ahead and space this out again. The rect that we're going to use, well, we've got the sender. So we'll say the sender was a UI button. And he's got a frame. So we use that as our rect. The view that we're going to use is self.view. Animated, sure. And let's go ahead and all we have to do is it's already in the heap, it's already wired up. We just have to make it visible on the screen. If I click on this, did not expect it to go on top. Red, yellow, cyan. Perhaps I should have set a preferred arrow direction. Didn't have to do this in my demo before. To be honest, I don't really know how to change it. It just kind of does whatever it wants. I prefer it below, but I guess it's fine above. I kind of like below better. And if you figure out how to do it, send me an email, because I'd rather it be on the bottom, but I'm not going to fix it. But it should do its thing. So if I click on red, click on yellow, click on cyan. One thing that's interesting is note how there's no button for no change. That's because you just click outside. So they decided on the iPad not to show that button, which is kind of neat. So they don't show you that button at all. We do have the stupid problem again where rotates get all messed up. So it didn't look too bad here, but you can see that it's not centered up on it anymore. So you could stop watching from here if you wanted, but I'm going to go ahead and fix the rotate real quick just because it bugs me. So it's almost exactly the same as what we did before. So before we had a restore popover. Here I'm going to say restore action sheet. I'm going to choose not to make an IVAR out of it. And I'm just going to take it down, which is very similar to what we did before. So if self dot color action sheet, I believe it's just called is visible this time. So if it was visible, then store the fact that it was up. And then dismiss, obviously it's not called popover. It's called dismiss with click buttons. You have to say what button was clicked to get rid of it. And the button, just to be safe, we'll say that it was the cancel button. Animated, no. So that'll take it down. And then to put it back up, we're just going to say if restore action sheet. Then let's restore it. And when we restore it, let's make sure we don't restore it multiple times. To restore it, I'm just going to steal what we did before. I'm just going to steal from here. And you can see that we've got a problem. Before we use the sender's frame, well, we don't have access to the sender in here. So I'm going to have to make a color change button. And I could use a tag or something like that, but I've been making IVARs today. I kind of get in a rhythm of doing a certain style. So I'm going to go ahead and make a color change button. I'm going to synthesize it. I'm going to release it. Oops. And if my view goes away, I certainly won't need it because it'll come back with the view. And then I'm going to connect it. And now if I run it, I should be able to have it rotate cleaner. Oh, show from rect color button dot frame. Now if I click on it here and then I rotate, you can see it makes it go down and then it puts it right back up. So pretty slick little app that we've got here. So we've shown you how to make popovers, which is probably what people care most about. We've shown you all the details that go into making a popover look good, things like rotation, arrow direction, yada yada yada. We've shown you action sheets, which are really, popovers under the hood. We've given you ideas for how to make your apps implement on both the iPhone and the iPad, and trying to do it smart to where you reuse as much as you can. And hopefully it's a really interesting example that you see all of the things that we were after. So go ahead and get the slides caught up here. So we worked with inheritance, modal view controllers, popovers. We saw rotations, action sheets, and we did some more with delegates. So that's it for modal view controllers and popovers. You are now a master of managing 2 different view controllers one at a time. Next time we're going to come back, we're going to do some more advanced things with many different views. It's going to be really some good stuff. So hope to see you then. See you.